iTestify is about testifying of what Jesus Christ has done and can do in each of our lives. Through testimony of people just like you, and through study of His Word, our prayer is to encourage each follower of Christ to be a light in this world. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. Matthew 5:16.
Hello, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of iTestify. Today we have Tara Vang with us here today, one of our friends. She had traveled very far to be with us here. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. And so Tara has a lot of different roles that she plays. One of them is being that she is the Vice President of Evangelism for GYC. Mm-hmm. She is also the Assistant to the Director for Life Hope Centers for the Central California Conference. And she also graduated from Loma Linda University's School of Public Health.
Yes.
So it's so great that you could come here and visit with us. And so I know that you wanted to talk to us about just how your family and you ultimately became Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah,
so tell us about
journey. Thank you for inviting me. I just wanted to share how God has worked in my life, mm-hmm. and just to share my testimony. And it starts off with, can I start with a testimony?
Yes, start it.
So I actually got a call, and on this phone call was an elderly lady, and what happened was she was calling because she wanted glow tracts, and my phone number is on the back of every glow tract that is Hmong. And Hmong
your personal number?
Well, sort of, but not really.
Okay.
It leads to my phone.
It goes directly to you.
Yes, it does.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's part of my testimony. But basically, I didn't know that she would call me, but this elderly lady, she's 91, she actually is the wife of a missionary pilot that came to Laos in the 50s. And because of their missionary work, my family was touched by the Adventist message.
And you said she wanted glow tracts that were in Hmong.
Yes,
Can you
Hmong.
Tell us what that is? Or pronounce it correctly. Sorry.
So the Hmong language, it's a silent H, but it's because we have like a nasal, it's like Hmong. Okay. Like if I slowed it down, that's what it sounds like. It's like I kind of inhale and exhale, mm-hmm. and that's the H part. But what you hear is just Hmong. Okay. But Hmong is how I really say it. Okay. So anyway, so Hmong people are from Southeast Asia, and on this map you can see the country of Laos. My parents specifically are from Laos and northern Laos. But Hmong people live in Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Burma, and China. So the country of Laos was virtually unreached. There was not a single Adventist in the country until 1957, when this missionary pilot, Richard Hall, and his wife came and stepped foot. And they happened to come to the one village that my grandparents lived in.
Wow.
So I'm very fortunate that they came. Yeah. And she was the one that called me. So
it must have been such a surprise for you to receive that call. You knew about her, I'm assuming. You knew about both of them, but you had never had any personal contact with them?
I've never met them in person or never had personal contact. I only knew about them. They were kind of like a legend in my small mind. I didn't know that they were still alive. And so when I got the call, I just was like, wow, I didn't know that translating glow tracts would reunite me with the missionaries that began the work. So I got to talk to her, and I just wanted to share sort of the missionary work that they did. In fact, he was 32 years old. They were very young when they came to Laos, and he believed in the literal fulfillment of Revelation 14:6. So if you guys have your Bibles, I'd like to turn there. As a missionary pilot, he believed in the literal fulfillment of Revelation 14:6. And it says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people." As a missionary pilot, he believed he needed to fly and physically go to the most remote areas and bring the gospel and medical supplies and to those who are the least reached. And that happened to be a village that my grandparents lived in.
Really cool.
So I didn't know this all my life, actually. I didn't know this really until I went into ministry. And I'm going to show the next slide. And this is about the age of my parents when they were reached and they became
They're very young.
Adventists.
They look very young as well.
Yeah, they don't look like this anymore, but this is how they looked. And this is where he came. He was the first Adventist missionary to Laos. And it's just amazing that he would come into the one place in the country that can touch my family. And so my parents, they became Adventists because of his influence. And what happened was my grandpa, my paternal grandfather, he actually didn't become Adventist. It took him a long time, actually 10 years, before he made a decision. And in the country and in our culture, it's really hard to change. Because the Adventist message it's very life-changing. You change your diet, you had to get rid of all your idols, all the altars, things that are just completely foreign. But my dad was under spiritual attack, and in the culture, he basically had no time left to live. And so my paternal grandfather was just, he was very desperate to find a solution. He didn't want to lose his one and only son, which was my dad. So he decided to start observing the Adventists and all the missionaries that were in the village, because it wasn't just Adventists that they're in the village. There were all the other Christian denominations. And I asked my parents, like, why did you guys become Adventist? I mean, they're the most, to me, different, And basically it came down to three things: faithfulness, friendliness, and effectiveness. My grandfather, of course, didn't know the Bible. He wasn't literate, but he knew what friendliness was. He knew what effectiveness was. When people prayed, when the missionaries prayed, did it work? That's basically how they had to judge the missionaries. And by God's grace, when the Adventist missionaries prayed, there was immediate healing in the home.
Wow.
And I just thank the Lord that the missionaries were there to witness. And they were very friendly, and they kept the Sabbath, and they lived what they preached. And that
Is that what you meant by faithfulness?
Yes.
Sticking, they could see it lived out in their lives.
Exactly. Yeah. So after 6 months of observing, my grandfather decided we were going to become Seventh-day Adventists. And so, my family became Adventists, and they came into the home, got rid of all the idols, all the altars. And by God's grace, my dad is still alive today. So, he was healed.
That's amazing. And did how many? So you were talking about your parents. They have siblings as well.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did they have siblings?
No.
parents. Oh.
So my dad was the only surviving child.
Oh.
And then my mom has siblings, but when a girl gets married in our culture, they kind of leave their family culture, and they're part of the husband's family.
Oh, so she's like, okay.
Yeah. So I do have aunts and uncles who are not believers.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. But so that was just a brief overview of how my family and why they became. But the journey didn't stop there. During this time, this was the early 70s, there was a war going on, and it was called the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War was a war that really tore Southeast Asia. And in the war, the Hmong people, my people, they supported the Americans. The American CIA wanted expert jungle fighters, and they hired about 300,000 Hmong people,
Wow.
Wow.
Hmong men and boys.
Because they had the local knowledge.
They had the local knowledge. They were experts in the jungles, and we lost about 50,000 fighting for America. And when Saigon fell and when the war ended, April 30, 1975, genocide was declared on Hmong people. And so my dad was a medic in the war. He had a lot of medical missionary training, but because of his association, he had to leave the country because of his association with the military.
Was he able to leave, or did he have to sneak out?
They had to get out in the middle of the night during monsoon season so that their tracks cannot be traced and so that leaves cannot be heard when they stepped.
So very much sneaking out. They were not
Very
allowed-
much
not
in the
allowed
middle of
to.
the night. Yeah, it was genocide. If you were caught escaping, you were killed.
What was, I'm just curious on that. Was there actually a process where eventually they were going to come to everybody's house, and if you were Hmong, then they were just going to say, now that's it?
Yes.
Okay.
At this stage, I was also curious, did your parents have children yet, or it was just the two of them?
They just had one boy, my oldest brother at this point. But I kind of jumped ahead of what I was going to share, and I wanted to share that what the missionaries did and how it really impacted my family and how their impact really set the journey for how they survived this exodus, leaving the country. So if we can start playing the videos. I have 4 videos of different clips to describe how the missionaries impacted the Hmong. So 1959, this ministry and these missionaries came, and it wasn't until about 10 years later that my family made that decision to become Adventist. And they taught them how to pray, they taught them how to keep the Sabbath, and during their exodus out of the country because of the war in Laos, in Vietnam and Laos, my parents prayed every step of their way to escape, and God answered every step of the way. And so they crossed the Mekong River, which borders Laos and Thailand, and they came to the Mekong River, and my dad, there was about 20 people in their party, their escape party, exodus party. And they can hear soldiers in the background, and this was very stressful time for them, and there was a boat keeper who could be hired to transport people across. And unfortunately, everybody tried to get on the boat, and the boat started to sink because the boat was too small and there was too many people. And so they had to get rid of stuff, and people had to volunteer to get off. And this is a time where everyone is stressed out. It's an exodus, and there's soldiers in the back. They can hear them. And my parents no one wanted to get off. So what do? Eventually, they got rid of everything that they carried, and that still didn't help. And then 3 people of the 20 decided to get off the boat so that the first trip can make it. And that they would come back and get the remaining 3. So one of those volunteers was my grandfather. He was the one that decided that my family should become Adventists. Well, he decided to volunteer and stay behind. And the first boat trip made it. It had my mom, my dad, and my oldest brother. But the second boat trip, it never made it. The boat capsized, and my grandfather never came out of that. So, so that's the tragedy. But I'm thankful that my grandfather made that decision so that my parents could live.
Wow.
And so my parents ended up in the refugee camps of Thailand. And they came to America in 1978, way before I was born. And they became the first Hmong Seventh-day Adventist family in America. So,
Just hearing about your grandfather and the spiritual role that he had in your family's destiny and journey, and then the sacrifice he made, makes me think of Jesus.
Amen. Yeah.
Yes.
Giving us, obviously, that leading us to himself, which your grandfather led your family to Jesus in a way, and then
Yes.
he ended up allowing others to go while he himself sacrificed. And
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's a very personal story, but I'm thankful, and I'm hopeful because we have such a beautiful message on the state of the dead, and just knowing that is we have such a wonderful hope. And so my family, they came to America, and it was really hard as refugees because they had to assimilate. And as refugees, you don't know how to open a doorknob. You don't know what a grocery store is. You have no knowledge of the host country. And my parents experienced that. They ate actually a loaf of bread for a week. One slice of bread, 3 meals a day. They had no idea, there was food and who was going to help them. They did find a helper in the hotel that they stayed at. There was an African-American janitor that fed them, and he spent $19 of his own money, is what my dad told me. And he took them to the grocery store and able to get them an actual meal. But eventually my family settled in Santa Barbara, California, and the Hmong community, there was a small Hmong community there, and they wanted to invite my family into the community because we've all gone through this refugee experience together. And at this time, in the late 70s, there was only 2 boys in the family, so another boy was added. Basically, they were saying, why don't you leave your church, come and be part of us so that we can help each other. And, my family was very conflicted because you don't really have community. The only community that exists would be going back to the old ways. And so my dad wrote a letter to the Thailand missions and told them, we're in America, this is our address, where is the Seventh-day Adventist Church? 2 weeks after that letter was sent out, it was the Sabbath, and there was a knock on the door, and the local Santa Barbara Seventh-day Adventist Church pastor was there to pick up my family for church.
That's really cool.
And he would come back for 6 months every Sabbath to pick up my family of 4 at that time. And I honestly believe that's the reason why I'm still in the church, because this family, this church just loved us into the faith.
So there was definitely a language barrier there.
Absolutely. We had no knowledge of the language. My parents still struggle with the language. And this is my family you see in the back. And I am one of 8. I'm actually the 7th.
Are you the small
Are
one?
you the small one in the
Yes,
on the
I'm
right?
the small one with a Dora haircut. Way before Dora was popular. So we grew up in the church, and they gave us the rights to being first at potluck, getting in the line. They gave us clothes, toys. They invited us to Thanksgiving. We were the only refugee family in the church, but we were very much loved. And, we've never forgotten everything that this church has ever done for us. In fact, we go back to visit just so that we can reminisce how it all began. So this was sort of my upbringing. And I grew up, though, always in the public school. I went to public university. And I actually left the church when I went to college. I didn't go to church at all. But it wasn't until I came to Loma Linda that God was calling me back into understanding why I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist. And it was amazing. I was praying, where should I go to church? And I visited several young adult ministries, and eventually I came to Advent Hope, and I was so thankful because I prayed for 2 things: a convicting message and a young person that would invite me to potluck. If the Lord met those 2, then I knew that this is where I needed to be. And I was on my way out after a convicting message that first Sabbath. And I actually spoke to the Lord. I was like, well, no one invited me to
1 for 2.
to potluck. And right when I said that, there was a young girl. She stopped me and invited me to potluck.
And for our viewers, Advent Hope is one of the many young adult ministries here in Loma Linda.
Yeah.
And
And I'm just curious, how did you get involved in translating the Glow Tract into Hmong?
So it very quickly, basically what happened was during Advent Hope, we would go door to door, and we would pass out glow tracts, and we had the one on health, and I was, of course, studying public health. So the thought came to me, this needs to be in Hmong, but it was just a passing thought. So after I graduated from Loma Linda, I went to Fresno, California, which is where GLOW is, that's the home base, the Central California Conference. I met up with them and I said, look, I really want this in my own language. How can I make this happen? And they were so supportive. And so next thing I know, we have 6 glow tracks in Hmong, and I used to go to be entertained, but now our festivals. We have festivals where 100,000 of us are there, and I used to go to be entertained, but now I go with glow tracks, and we've been passing them out everywhere every year, and that's how I got involved with ministry. So I left my secular job to go into full-time ministry, And it's just been a blessing since then.
One point was just keeps on sticking in my mind is that you said back in Laos, and when your dad was in the army, he was a medic.
Yeah.
And then you said that it was because the missionaries taught him that, some skills in
Yeah.
that. And I just thought, wow, that's it's amazing all the different areas in life that a missionary, any of us really, can affect someone else's life. And then in turn, that life can help others. And he wasn't in the army to kill, he was in the army to save.
Amen. Yeah.
And now I see that you're doing the same thing,
Yeah.
and you're going back to our culture, to your culture,
Yes.
just like he was going to
Yeah.
his, and spreading what the Lord has given us to share.
Yeah, and actually I'm involved with bringing Bibles to the different parts of Southeast Asia for Hmong people who are hungry for the truth. So you can contact me. I think my email can be put up, taravang@gmail.com, if you want to learn more.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on, Tara. Powerful stories. I know I've been moved, and I hope that everyone else has been as well. And just thanks for tuning in for this episode. We hope you will join us again in the future.